Convergence in Solow growth model. What do we mean by convergence? Under certain circumstances, backward countries would converge towards the rich countries, right? So in order to close the gap between the rich and the poor countries, in this process of catching up, when backward countries are catching up with the forward countries, that process is called convergence. So let me write this point and then I'll move forward. Please write under circumstances, under certain circumstances, backward countries would tend to grow faster than rich countries in order to close the gap between the two countries. And this phenomena of catching up is called convergence. This phenomena of catching up is called convergence, right? So what is the second point? So Solow growth model, I mean, we are making two assumptions about the convergence. One, we have two identical countries. So when we say two identical countries, it means all the parameters are same. They have same total factor productivity growth. They have same labor force growth. They have same savings rate. So the initial assumptions, initial conditions are same, right? That is, we have two countries, so assumptions. We have two identical countries. Same total factor productivity growth. Labor force growth. Savings rate, right? And the other assumption is that although they are identical, means their growth rates for total factor productivity is same, their growth rate for labor force is same, their growth rate in their savings rate is same. But initially, one country is starting with the higher capital per labor and hence higher output per labor, and the another country is starting with a lower capital per labor and hence lower output per labor, right? So the rich country has initially a higher level of capital per worker relative to the poor country. So if they're starting with the higher capital per labor, it means that they have higher output per labor also, right? I hope you remember we did this now. Small y is equal to small k to the power alpha. This was the production function in the intensive form. So you start with small k to the power alpha, means you have the higher capital labor ratio. It is going to transform into higher output per labor ratio. And consequently, higher output per labor, right? Higher output per labor. Fair enough. So up until now, we haven't come to the point of convergence, right? I'm just going to show it to you. Beta. So you have, I hope you remember this curve, SFK curve, right? And this guy is your n plus delta k curve. And at this point, you have steady state level of capital labor ratio. Now, rich country is starting with the higher capital labor ratio. And poor country is starting with the lower capital labor ratio. Rich country is starting with the higher capital labor ratio, and poor country is starting with the lower capital labor ratio, right? Now, if you just have a look at it, both of them are going to converge towards K star. The growth rate which the rich country requires to reach towards K star is lesser than as compared to the growth rate which the poor country would require to reach towards the K star. So poor country will start converging towards the rich country. Both of them will converge towards K star. Rich country requires lower growth rate and the poor country requires higher growth rate to reach towards K star, which you show diagrammatically as this also. Which you show diagrammatically as this also. You have log of capital Y and T out here. And this is, let's say, the long run growth path. This is what we have as the long run growth path. And so rich country will converge like this. Poor countries starting with a lower capital labor ratio. Will also converge. toward this way, right? So what you're trying to say is that the countries which have the lower output per worker or income per worker, they have higher growth rates in income per worker. You get the point? You want to see the negative correlation between the level of income of the country and the growth rates. So what you're trying to see is, I mean, in the panel where you have certain countries, there are some rich countries, some poor countries. You want to see, I mean, when the convergence is going to happen is when the countries which have lower income per capita, they will have higher growth rates this way. But empirically, what they found was this, that when they looked at convergence, among all countries, they found it does not happen. I'm making 3 diagrams. It will make things little clear to you. So here you have the percentage growth rate in income per worker, and here you have income per worker, right? So now what I'm doing is this. Just see this. 20, 40, 80, 100, 120, and so on. Here at this point, you have -4, -2, 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay. So one of the country whose income is less, it is having a high growth rate. But there are some countries whose income is less, their growth rates are also low. There are countries whose income is less, their growth rates are low. But there are some countries whose income, here there is one country whose income is more, but their growth rate is less. But there are some countries whose income is more, their growth rate is also more. So the point which I want to make is that when they ran the regression, or when they find out the correlation, they find this, that it is not necessary that the countries which have low income per worker, they will also have the high percentage growth rate in income per worker. You want the negative correlation. But this they found that if you look at the entire data of all the countries together, you do not get this point where you see the negative correlation, because in case if there is negative correlation, so which country will have the lower income per worker? Poor country. When will the convergence is going to happen? Convergence is going to happen when the poor country is going to have the higher growth rates. But okay, this is happening here, yes, but this is not happening here. And the higher income countries will have the lower growth rates. This is happening here, but this is not happening here. So it is not necessary that the convergence, you will be able to see convergence when you take up the data for all the countries together. That's not necessary. So you would like to see the negative correlation. So please write this. We would like to see a negative correlation so that poor countries are growing faster then rich countries, thus catching up. Thus catching up. So here you do not see this. Here you do not see this. That is, if you look at the data for all the countries together for a long time period, you won't be able to see this. But then what happens is that if you look at only some rich countries, so you take up the subset of countries, you take up only those countries which are rich. I mean, why are we saying that this is not happening? So you look at the country like Ethiopia. So do we see this, that of course Ethiopia has the low income. Does it also have the high growth rate? No. Is it able to catch up with US? No. But if you look at only the subset of countries, supposedly you look at only a few rich countries, and then you look at the data, then you will find that yes, there is some evidence of catching up. There is some evidence of convergence, right? So convergence, please write this. Occurs to some extent among rich countries. So among rich countries, yes, you see convergence happening. So here, just see, you write it like this: 50, 60, 90, 100, 110, and so on. All right. -1, -0.5, 0, 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2, and 2.5, and so on. So you have this. So among the rich countries whose income is less, you find some countries, yes, they have the high growth rates among the rich countries. Among the rich countries whose income is more, you find that yes, they have the low growth rates. So there is some evidence of convergence in what you call rich countries, that yes, you see this kind of negative correlation there in case of rich countries, that yes, there is. Among poor countries, again, you do not see convergence. I mean, this is what so convergence does not occur among poor countries. Right. So here you started like this: 2, 4, 10, 18. You have -4, -2, 0, 2, 4, 6. So again, here you do not find any pattern. No, that's not necessary. So you do not find convergence among the poor countries. You do not find convergence among the poor countries. So You do not see convergence happening in all countries. You do not see convergence happening in poor countries. You see convergence happening to a certain extent in rich countries. Here comes the difference between the unconditional and the conditional convergence. So I'll be telling you about the conditional and conditional convergence in the next class. But the question which we want to answer in this class is, why do we actually not see that convergence is happening in all countries? Why exactly it is happening? Why are we not seeing convergence happening in all countries? The basic reason could be that the access to technology is not same for all the countries. It is not same. Can we say that Ethiopia has the same access to technology as US has? Okay, can we say that India has the same access to technology what US has, what UK has? So the access to technology is not same. So what you assumed earlier, that all countries are identical. They have the same savings rate. They have the same population growth rate. They have the same labor force growth rate. They have the same technology. No, that assumption is wrong. So not all countries have the same technology. So the technology access is different. And because the access to technology is different, you do not find the evidence of convergence in all countries. That's an idea, right? So countries do not have access to same technology. So our assumptions, they do not. And why do we think that countries do not have the same access to technology? The main reason could be that the countries that do not have the same access to technology because of government intervention. How government intervention is going to create the problem in technology, problem in access to technology? The reason is government intervention may have created labor unions. Labor unions have got bargaining power because of this government intervention. These labor unions will not allow firms to access the technology which is going to hamper their own employment, right? So here government intervention is coming. Because of government intervention, you have labor unions. Because of these labor unions, they will not allow firms to have an access to technology. I mean, which labor unions do not want? One. Other reason could be that government intervention can also create barriers to international trade. When government intervention can create barriers to international trade, then the domestic firms, if they want a better technology, which the foreign firms are using, they will not have an access to that. So because of this reason also, the convergence is not going to happen. So government intervention could maybe create problems because it might create trade unions for the reasons I've told you, how this will hamper the same access of technology for all the countries. Secondly, it can also lead to barriers to international trade. So because governments, they might create barriers to international trade. And why do government create barriers to international trade? Because government has the nationalist policies. Government has the protectionist policies. They want to protect their indigenous industries. They want to protect their industries from the foreign competition. They want their industries to grow, first of all, without any competition. But the problem is there is no growth without competition. That is always there. So this is about the meaning of convergence. So I'm going to connect this with Solow growth model also with a diagram. And I'll be telling you about the conditional and the unconditional convergence in the next class. Right? Thank you, Beta.